Okay, jumping a bit with the world,
Sure.
I find it really interesting how there's so many analogs with our world, modern day, post-industrial, all this kind of stuff. But then you'll see things like, say, in Dead Country, where there's no like integrated post system, and it
Mhm.
takes weeks and weeks for Tara's mother's letter to reach her. And we
Yeah.
do have kind of intercontinental travel, but obviously it's not accessible to most people. And
Yeah.
especially in like the equivalent North America, there's kind of like seems like city states,
Hmm.
which is obviously not how we are now. We haven't really seen that much of the old world, but from it does seem a little bit more city state-ish, an empire as opposed to what we'd consider to be countries, I guess, today.
Yeah.
Um, has that kind of caused problems at any point in the writing that you're kind of thinking, oh, this will happen. Oh, crap, we don't actually have this thing. I can't make that happen. There is no comparison. Or is it more freeing that you can just invent something cool?
Um, a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
As always.
Yeah, the world has sort of developed in this agglutinative style. Like this seems to imply this, and this other thing must be true over here. And sometimes I've ended up in situations where a fact that was established in some earlier books turns out to not be really the way that I would love the world to stitch together, but it's okay. It's workaroundable.
Yeah.
Um, in the case of the like sort of lack of an integrated post system, I think it is true, or at least heavily implied, that at a certain level of like whether it's class or
Yeah.
thaumaturgical import, there are pretty direct linkages between the major cities and centers of
Yeah.
craft, whether it's the Nightmare Telegraph or long
I
distance
love that
rail
idea, by the way.
something.
It's my favorite thing.
Yes, it's good. I'm a big fan of the Nightmare Telegraph. It's extremely screamy. Everybody's like, everybody laughed. Everybody laughed at the Nightmare Telegraph, and then they all started calling their phones the "What Fresh Horrors" device. And know,
Yeah, doom scrolling feels very apt for nightmares.
yes, exactly. Very true in the craft universe.
Yeah.
So for example, I think the big difference that I'll use to fudge or get away with a lot of this exact sort of thing in world building is that there are really strong gradients
Yeah.
in density, urbanization, civilization in the craft sequence universe, like much stronger than in most places
Hmm.
in our world. And I think some of this came from when I was living in Southern Anhui and like which is in rural China, basically southeastern China, and I was living in a tiny town that was like basically a Ming Dynasty village across the road from the high school where I was teaching, right? And I was living in the sort of high school compound.
Yeah.
And if I walked out the back of the school, it was water buffalo fields all the way back into these mountains. And you could just keep going. There were dirt roads, like thin one lane sort of Ireland style dirt roads, uh, deep on out into the mountains. And, some days I would just go and walk all day in that direction. And as far as I could tell, it just kept going on forever. Um, so the school obviously got mail, and there were bus services, and but we had students who couldn't go home over the weekend and sort of boarded for the whole semester at the school because to get home they needed to ride a bus for half a day, connect to another bus, ride that bus for another
Yeah.
half a day, and now you're up in the tea farming regions of the mountains, and you just barely have time to do that and then turn around and get up on the bus at 6 o'clock the next morning and come back before school was going to start again. So I guess it was that sense of, somewhere there's actually only 4 hours that away. If you get on the freeway, there's Shanghai, and like there's this bustling center of commerce and urban development. And then you can hop on the Digital and be in Beijing by the end of the day, and you're at the center of you're at the center of this sort of CCP authority. And there are punk shows, and there's all sorts of, but here it's also possible to be, a full day's drive away from
Anything at all.
um, almost anything that's not, the people that you grew up with for your entire life, uh, without even leaving the county.
Yeah.
So I guess I was kind of leaning into that, the vibe of that, the feeling that Terra really can be in Edgemont and pretty much off the grid, and that like Edgemont feels as isolated, sort of is in the fictional context of the universe as isolated as a lot of small towns like that can feel from, the big city far away.
It felt a bit Outback Australia to me, where it just
Yeah.
literally is nothing but outback, and that's for days and days, this humongous sky, and that's all you can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, driving backcountry in the US, the internet has changed it and cell phones have changed it, but there's still this feeling of like, oh, last gas station for the next 90 miles.
I think that is something that as a European, it's a bit harder to visualize, because being from Scotland, there is the Highlands where you can get completely lost, but unless there's something goes wrong, if you drive for 4 or 5 hours, you're going to get somewhere. Like you can't get that far away from anything over here. And I don't think I've ever actually been anywhere other than when I was very young in Australia that has that sense. So I think for me, the books that are set in cities felt much more, not manageable, but familiar in that way. And I think in some ways I got very claustrophobic reading Dead Country, because it is so small and just it felt like really terrifying to me, actually, that idea of that thing. And I think that's probably I identify far too hard with Tara just in general, so like that's definitely a thing for me. And I don't have the same background by any means, but I think that deep connection, feeling that, and then this incomprehensibility of being that far away from stuff. It really drove home the themes, I think, for me at the very least.
And I'm glad. I will say the one thing that I wish I had done, well, there was no way to do it differently, but the one sort of world building issue that has grown and grown in import for me is I was writing the first book maybe a year and a half after the iPhone was the thing. I remember, I think while I was in the middle of drafting 3 Parts Dead, like my friend who was a huge Apple nerd got the iPhone and was like taking pictures with it and was very excited. I think you could take pictures with it at the time. Yeah, so it was like a big moment for him.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't feel. I felt like, okay, that kind of instant internet in your pocket thing is basically the province of people who are working in the like high craft firms. So you'll see like DeNovo's checking his watch at various times, and like there's some sort of like magical Nightmare Telegraph enabled telecommunications kind of analog that they can. But basically it was sort of Blackberries inspired, and it certainly wasn't something that everybody was doing all the time. And to the extent that the books are interested in a kind of social satire angle, it's felt harder and harder to push that without the piece of magic glass that everybody's having in their pocket, which is like an incredibly craft world thing. But trying to invent the iPhone in the craft universe would have then been a whole different book. So I tried to touch on sort of Nightmare Telegraphics as like a startup culture in Ruin of Angels, and I've been sort of pushing it in that direction. But like that's one of those moments where reality has gotten even weirder than
we're still in kind of 2010 period for craft sequence.
Exactly.
Whatever happens in Craft Wars, the iPhone can come after that. But
maybe that would have been a good take on it. Just the Craft Wars, the iPhone. Social media.
I would love that. That would be absolutely hilarious. I could see you pulling that together. But obviously, if you're already however far through 3rd book, I feel like putting in an iPhone subplot is probably not the best use of your time right now.
Well, I mean, you having read Dead Country, you've got probably a sense that there's a certain amount of relevance.
just a little bit. Just
a bit.
Yeah, I've been going through with my Post-it notes and highlighter pens. So far again, doing my whole thing of getting far too granular with something no one else is going to think about in as much depth as me. but it's fun. So
and share that with the world. Hey, I have thought about it. I would hope I've thought about it in at least that as much depth.
I think
so
you'll have thought about it more than me.
No, but my point is that it's great to know that there are people out there, that somebody is taking these books. Well, it is always wonderful to meet somebody and to talk with someone who is taking the books seriously in that way. So
incredibly seriously.